The alien transport ship drifted silently through the endless black of space, its cold, metallic walls humming with the rhythmic thrum of distant engines. Dim lights flickered erratically overhead, casting jagged shadows that danced along the narrow corridors. Two Xanthar guards, towering creatures with black-scaled bodies and glowing amber eyes, stood outside a holding cell, their sharp claws clicking against the metal floor as they shifted impatiently. "This one was too easy," one of them grumbled, flicking his tail in irritation. "Humans are fragile." The other responded flatly. "What did you expect?" Inside the cell, sitting on the hard metal floor, was an elderly human. His name didn't matter to the Xanthar, just another specimen snatched from backward planet. He sat cross-legged, an air of casual comfort about him, as if he were lounging on a park bench instead of locked in an alien brig. Balding and slightly hunched, he scratched the stubble on his chin, muttering to himself. "Could have at least let me grab my slippers." The guards watched him in silence, waiting for the panic to set in, but none came. The human merely adjusted his seat, stretching his legs with a groan, like a man settling in for a Sunday afternoon nap. The largest of the guards growled and pressed a glowing panel beside the energy barrier. With a low hum, the shimmering field dissolved. The Xanthar stepped inside, towering over the old man. His mandibles clicked as he leaned closer, claws extending to lift the human's chin. "You will answer our questions," the alien hissed. The old man squinted up at the guard, his expression a mixture of amusement and mild annoyance, as if sizing up a faulty toaster. "You always this friendly? Or is it just a Monday thing?" The guard faltered, momentarily thrown off by the unexpected response. Captives were supposed to cower. They were supposed to plead, bargain, or scream. Instead, this human had greeted him with sarcasm. The human leaned back on his hands, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "Tell you what, if you've got coffee on board, I might answer a question or two. Otherwise, well," he trailed off, shrugging nonchalantly, as if the entire kidnapping was merely an inconvenience. The second guard, less patient, stepped forward, claws clicking sharply with every step. "Enough," he snarled. "Humans are weak. You will comply." The old man chuckled softly, shaking his head as if he'd just heard a ridiculous joke. "Weak? Nah. We just know when to pick our battles." His voice was calm, like a teacher explaining a simple truth to a particularly dense student. "The real trick isn't in the fighting. It's knowing when not to fight." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't how prisoners were supposed to act. Where was the fear? The desperation? Instead, they were being met with wit and an unnerving calm, as if this old man had seen everything the universe had to offer and found it all mildly amusing. He continued, his voice smooth and easy, like someone telling a story he'd told 1,000 times before. "Ever been fishing? You sit there, staring at the water, waiting. No fuss, no splashing, just patience. And when the moment's right, bam, that's when you reel 'em in." The Xanthar guards shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to this. Fear, compliance, those they could understand. But this quiet confidence unsettled them in a way no weapon ever could. The old man tilted his head, giving them a look that was equal parts expectant and amused. "So, what's the plan, fellas? We just gonna glare at each other all day, or are you gonna offer me some tea?" A low growl rumbled from one of the guards, frustration laced with confusion. Yet, beneath the irritation, something else flickered, a hint of curiosity. This human wasn't what they had expected, not at all. And for the first time in their long, conquest-filled lives, the Xanthar guards weren't entirely sure who was in control of the situation. The interrogation room was dimly lit, with only a dull, overhead light casting long shadows that flickered slightly. The walls pulsed with the faint hum of alien technology. Across the metallic table sat the old man, legs crossed, posture loose, as if waiting for a lazy afternoon chat. Two Xanthar guards loomed over him, their amber eyes burning with frustration. One of them slammed a clawed fist on the table, causing a metallic clang to reverberate through the room. Frank Harrigan, 74 years old, retired handyman, lover of crossword puzzles, barely reacted. He gave a small, tired sigh, as if the interruption was mildly annoying. "You know, that kind of racket could wake the dead. No respect for a man's nap these days." The guards snarled, but Frank's calm demeanor remained unshaken. His lips curled slightly, the same kind of smile a grandfather might give when watching children struggle to open a jar. The Xanthar expected fear or pleading. Instead, they were getting patience. "You will tell us everything," one guard barked, his voice sharp and guttural. Frank raised an eyebrow as if considering the statement carefully. "Everything? That's a tall order. I've got a lifetime of stories, son. Where do you want me to start? Back in '85, I built a shed that could survive a hurricane. Pretty proud of that one." The guards exchanged another set of confused glances. They were used to captives breaking down under pressure, but this human's resistance wasn't defiance. It was something far more infuriating. He treated them like children, too young to understand the bigger picture. "This is no game," the other guard hissed, his mandibles twitching with irritation. "We demand answers. You will comply." Frank let out a low chuckle, shifting comfortably in his seat. "You keep saying that like I owe you something. You ever notice how demands never get you what you want? Might want to jot that one down." The Xanthar guards were growing restless. One of them leaned in closer, sharp claws tapping against the table as if trying to summon some measure of intimidation. Frank didn't even blink. "You conquered all those planets out there," Frank said, gesturing vaguely to the walls. "And this is what you do with your free time? Throw a fit when a tired old man doesn't play along?" The larger guard growled low in his throat, struggling to suppress the rising frustration. It was clear that brute force wasn't going to work on this human, but that only made things more troubling. The Xanthar prided themselves on overwhelming strength and dominance, yet here they were, disarmed, not by a weapon, but by wit and patience. Frank leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with the nearest alien. "You know what your problem is?" he said, voice calm but deliberate. "You've spent so long trying to make people scared of you, you forgot how to talk to them. That's why you keep barking orders, thinking it'll get you somewhere." For a moment, the room fell into an uneasy silence. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Not used to being on the defensive, Frank let the moment linger, savoring the quiet discomfort that settled in the air. He had seen this kind of bravado before, in young men too eager to prove themselves, too quick to throw punches when words would have done just fine. "You ever fish?" he asked suddenly, shifting the conversation with the same ease as turning a page. "Patience, that's the key. You sit real quiet, wait for just the right moment. If you're smart, you don't fight the fish right away. You let it wear itself out first." One of the guards clicked his mandibles nervously. There was an unsettling simplicity to the human's words, as if he was sharing some ancient wisdom far beyond their grasp. It was irritating and, more than a little, unnerving. "Humans waste time," one guard muttered under his breath, as if trying to convince himself. Frank gave a slow, thoughtful nod, his expression serious for the first time. "Sometimes, yeah, but see, wasting time has its perks. Makes you notice things others miss." He gestured vaguely at the walls, where the flickering light above them buzzed with an irregular hum. "Like that? That hum's not right. Feels like your engines are running a little out of sync. Ever think about fixing that?" The guards stiffened, exchanging worried glances. One of them reached for a communicator, claws fumbling slightly. Frank grinned, but only just. "You hear it now, don't you?" he said softly, his voice almost conspiratorial. "That's the sound of trouble, boys, and if I can hear it, well." He left the thought unfinished, but the implication hung heavy in the air. The guards shifted uncomfortably. The hum had been there all along, so faint, so easy to dismiss, yet the human had noticed it without even trying, and now the seed of doubt had been planted. Was there something wrong with the ship? Had they overlooked a critical detail? Frank leaned back again, folding his arms across his chest. Funny thing about little problems, if you ignore them long enough, they tend to become big ones. The tension in the room thickened, the guards visibly unsettled by the sudden shift in control. This was no ordinary prisoner. He wasn't fighting them with strength or defiance. He was slowly, methodically, dismantling their sense of superiority. "Here's a bit of advice," Frank said, his voice almost fatherly now. "Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is ask for help. You'd be amazed what you can learn when you stop pretending to know everything." One of the guards clenched his fists, mandibles clicking nervously. They had faced countless enemies, warriors, rebels, insurgents, but none of them had prepared them for this. An old man with too much patience and far too many stories. Now, Frank continued, his tone light again. If you've got any more questions, I'd be happy to chat, but fair warning, if you're just gonna sit there growling at me, we're both gonna get real bored, real fast. The silence stretched, thick with uncertainty. The guards didn't know what to do. They had expected resistance or submission, something predictable. Instead, they were left questioning their tactics, their instincts, and even the integrity of their own ship. Frank gave them a knowing smile, the kind that only comes from years of experience. See, boys, the real trick to winning isn't just knowing your enemy, it's knowing yourself. The hum of the ship seemed louder now, as if echoing the subtle shift in the room. The guards, once so confident in their dominance, found themselves standing on unsteady ground, and Frank, ever patient, sat quietly, waiting for the moment when they would finally realize that they were no longer in control. The hum of the alien ship deepened, vibrating through the walls like an off-tune instrument. Frank sat quietly, his posture relaxed, watching the two Xanthar guards wrestle with the discomfort growing inside them. The flickering overhead lights painted jagged shadows across their reptilian faces, but the old man's expression remained calm, as though he were a fisherman waiting for the first nibble on the line. The guards muttered to each other in low, guttural tones, their frustration mounting. They couldn't understand what was happening. This human should have been easy prey, and yet, despite his age and frailty, he had managed to do something none of them expected. He had made them uneasy. One of the guards jabbed a claw toward Frank, voice laced with irritation. "You think yourself clever, human, but words cannot save you." Frank leaned forward slightly, hands resting on his knees. His expression softened. Not smug, just patient. "Words, eh? Funny thing about words. They tend to linger." He tapped the side of his head gently, as if sharing a secret. "Long after battles are fought and won, it's the words that stick around." The Xanthar captain entered the room then, his black-scaled form larger and more imposing than the guards. His amber eyes locked on Frank with the intensity of a predator circling its prey. He expected resistance or submission. What he got was neither. Frank gave the captain a nod, casual and untroubled. "You must be the boss. Glad to finally meet someone in charge." These two, he gestured toward the guards with a thumb, seem like they're still figuring things out. The captain narrowed his eyes. "We have conquered countless worlds. Your kind is insignificant." "Insignificant," Frank repeated with a chuckle, as if the alien had just complimented him. "You know, that's what the weeds in my garden used to think." Then I introduced them to a little thing called pruning. The captain's mandibles twitched. He wasn't used to this, someone speaking so freely without fear. There was a subtle but undeniable shift happening, a gradual erosion of the power the Xanthar thought they held over their captive. The old man wasn't resisting. He was disarming them, bit by bit, without lifting a finger. "Let me tell you something," Frank said, voice low and easy. "You've got all this power, all this fancy technology." And yet he paused, letting the silence stretch. "You still haven't figured out the difference between control and trust." The captain stiffened, the flicker of doubt in his eyes unmistakable. Frank leaned back again, crossing his arms, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He could feel it. The tide was shifting, just a little longer, and the fish would bite. "You hear that hum?" Frank asked suddenly, jerking his head toward the walls. "Your ship's not as fine-tuned as you think. I'd wager your engine's running out of sync. Probably ignored it for a while, thought it wasn't a big deal. Now it's catching up with you." The captain's gaze darkened. He glanced toward one of the guards who fumbled with the control panel on his arm. The hum grew louder, more erratic, as if confirming Frank's words. "See," Frank said with a wink, "it's always the little things that'll get you." The captain's frustration boiled over. "Enough. You will tell us everything you know." Frank gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Sure, but here's the thing. You gotta ask the right questions." The captain took a step closer, towering over the old man. "And what question should we ask?" Frank's grin widened, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Why do you think I'm so calm?" The captain froze. It was such a simple question, but it hit like a hammer. Why was this human so calm? What did he know that they didn't? The unease that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into full-blown uncertainty. The Xanthar were no longer in control of the situation, and they knew it. Frank let the silence linger, enjoying the moment. "You see?" he said softly. Most folks panic when they think they're out of options. Me, I've been around long enough to know there's always another way. The captain glared at him, but there was something new in his gaze. Hesitation. Frank had planted a seed of doubt, and it was starting to sprout. That hum, Frank continued. It's not just a glitch. Something's off. I've been listening to ships long enough to know when trouble's coming. He leaned forward, his tone conspiratorial. Now, the question is, do you want to figure it out before it's too late? The captain's jaw clenched. He barked an order to the guards, who scrambled to check the ship's systems. The lights flickered again, more erratically this time, and the hum deepened, vibrating through the walls like a warning bell. Frank watched them work, his expression calm, almost sympathetic. Funny thing about problems, he mused aloud. They don't care how big your guns are. They just need someone with a little know-how to fix them. The captain rounded on him, frustration bleeding into his voice. Why would you help us? Frank gave a small shrug as if the answer were obvious. Because I can, and because you could use it. The captain stared at him, suspicion warring with reluctant gratitude. For the first time in a long while, the Xanthar found themselves in unfamiliar territory, not as conquerors, but as creatures in need of assistance. Frank leaned back, letting the moment sink in. It's all about patience, son. You let the fish wear itself out, and when the time's right, he gave a slow, knowing smile. That's when you reel it in. The captain's mandibles clicked together, a sound halfway between frustration and reluctant acceptance. He didn't know what game this old human was playing, but somehow Frank had turned the tables without ever raising his voice. The hum in the walls grew louder, more insistent. The ship's systems were failing, and time was running out. The captain gave a sharp nod to the guards, signaling them to bring Frank along. The old man stood slowly, stretching his arms with a contented sigh. About time. Let's see if we can't fix this mess before it gets out of hand. As they led him through the flickering corridors, the Xanthar captain couldn't help but glance at the human walking beside him. There was something unsettlingly reassuring about the old man's presence, a quiet confidence that defied everything the Xanthar had ever encountered, and, for the first time, the captain began to wonder if perhaps the most dangerous thing aboard his ship was not the malfunctioning systems, but the human who seemed to know exactly how to handle them. The corridors of the alien ship echoed with the deepening hum, each step reverberating like a countdown ticking toward disaster. Lights flickered sporadically overhead, casting fractured shadows against the metal walls. The two Xanthar guards flanked Frank as the captain led the way, his claws clicking sharply on the floor. Frank strolled along, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn pants, humming an old tune under his breath as if out for a leisurely walk in the park. The captain barked orders into his communicator, frustration simmering in his voice. Systems were failing, and no one had answers. Yet the human, the supposed prisoner, was strolling through their ship as if he were the one in charge. They reached the engine control room, where crew members scrambled around flickering consoles, tapping furiously at controls with no success. The hum of the engines had grown deeper and more irregular, signaling that something serious was brewing. Frank gave a low whistle. "Y'all got yourselves a real mess here," he said, scanning the chaotic room with a practiced eye. He ambled toward the main console, his movements slow and deliberate, as if time wasn't an issue. The captain loomed behind him, irritation clear in every flick of his tail. "We did not bring you here to mock us. Fix it, or you will suffer." Frank raised an eyebrow, the barest hint of a grin tugging at his lips. "Son, you can't rush a fix. That's how you make things worse. Now, hush up and let me think." The captain bristled, but didn't stop him. Frank crouched beside the primary engine control panel, giving it a gentle tap with his knuckles. He tilted his head, listening, as the hum vibrated through the walls. "There it is," he muttered to himself. "You've got a misaligned intake valve, probably something tiny that went overlooked. Betcha it's throwing the whole system out of whack." The crew exchanged uncertain glances, and the captain's glare sharpened. "Impossible. We scanned every system." Frank straightened, dusting off his hands. "Scans are fancy, sure, but sometimes you gotta trust your ears." He turned toward a nearby maintenance drone, half-functional and buzzing uselessly in the corner. "Let me borrow that little guy." He adjusted a few wires on the drone, making it sputter to life, and sent it scurrying through a narrow access hatch into the engine's inner workings. The Xanthar crew watched, baffled, as the drone navigated toward the problem area. "See?" Frank said. "The problem with high-tech folks like y'all is that you forget the basics. Sometimes, all it takes is a little wiggle in the right spot." The captain's frustration began to shift, his irritation giving way to something more complicated: curiosity. This human, with his strange wisdom and unhurried demeanor, was doing what their best engineers had failed to accomplish. The drone found the faulty valve, and, with a few quick adjustments, the hum in the walls began to smooth out, becoming steady and rhythmic once more. Lights flickered back to life, and the panicked alarms silenced, leaving the room in an almost eerie calm. Frank stepped back, hands on his hips, surveying his work. "There you go. Easy fix. Just needed someone with a bit of patience." The crew stared at him in stunned silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the captain approached, his claws tapping lightly against the metal floor. "Why did you help us?" the captain asked, voice low with suspicion. "You could have let us fail." Frank shrugged, the kind of casual, indifferent shrug of someone who had long since learned not to sweat the small stuff. "What's the point in that? You needed help, and I was here. Figured I might as well lend a hand." The captain narrowed his eyes. "We are your enemies. You owe us nothing." Frank smiled softly, the corners of his eyes crinkling with an easy warmth. "Y'all were just having a rough day. Everyone needs a bit of kindness now and then, even the scaly types." The captain stared at him, as if struggling to comprehend the simplicity of the answer. To the Xanthar, strength and dominance had always been the answer to every problem. Yet here was a human, an old, fragile one at that, who had conquered them not with weapons, but with wisdom, humor, and kindness. "Kindness is weakness," the captain muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Frank chuckled. "That's where you're wrong, son. Kindness is strength. Takes a whole lot more guts to be kind than it does to throw a punch." The captain fell silent, mandibles twitching thoughtfully. He had fought in countless battles, conquered worlds, and commanded legions, but this simple truth had eluded him, and now, standing before him, was a human who embodied that strength without ever lifting a weapon. The old man dusted his hands off again. "Well, if that's all, I'd say my work here's done." The captain tilted his head, something unfamiliar flickering in his amber eyes. "We could take you with us, learn from you." Frank shook his head with a chuckle. "Appreciate the offer, but I've got tomatoes to tend and a crossword puzzle waiting back home. Can't let those things go too long without attention." For a long moment, the captain said nothing. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You are unlike any being we have encountered." Frank grinned, patting the captain lightly on the arm as if they were old friends. "Humans, we're full of surprises." They escorted him back to the brig, but this time the energy field wasn't activated. Instead, the captain stood silently beside the open cell door, a strange and subtle respect in his posture. Frank gave him a nod. "Take care of yourselves, boys, and next time something breaks, don't be afraid to ask for help." With that, they loaded him back onto a shuttle bound for Earth. As the shuttle doors closed, the captain stood at the docking bay, watching it disappear into the vastness of space. On Earth, Frank stepped out onto his front porch, breathing in the fresh air and stretching his arms with a contented sigh. He poured himself a cup of tea, sat down in his favorite chair, and gazed up at the night sky. "Aliens," he muttered to himself, taking a sip, always in such a hurry. And with that, the old man leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled, a man at peace, knowing that somewhere out there in the stars, the Xanthar were left with far more than they had bargained for. Perhaps in time, they would learn that the conquering with kindness was the greatest victory of all.